Welcome back to our Indigenous Mental Health series. I am Jasmine Peterson, a psychological associate at Sullivan Associates Clinical Psychology. 215, 180, 104, 38, 35. Indigenous people across this nation know these numbers well, knew them well before they were unearthed by the media. Indigenous communities have been feeling the grief of these losses. It has reactivated trauma for families who did lose children, siblings, grandchildren, aunties, or uncles at a residential school. Today, I want to talk about grief and loss. When I treat Indigenous people for grief, a thing that is notable is that grief for Indigenous people often presents differently than a textbook case. It can be prolonged, intense, and intractable. For a while, I did not understand why the grief of my Indigenous clients was sometimes so difficult to treat. So I looked for answers outside of the Western model in traditional knowledges. Grief in Indigenous communities presents as a huge issue for several reasons. Extent of loss. Since colonization, Indigenous communities have had higher rates of mortality. Many communities see loss so frequently that it is challenging to process grief because it is almost a constant state in their lives. We lose people to suicide, health issues, with inequitable access to healthcare and ongoing problem, violence, accidents, and so on. For some communities hit particularly hard by sudden loss, they are always in a season of grieving. And there is a ripple effect. A loss in one community can affect many communities because of relational ties or friendships. How we lose loved ones also matters. When a person dies suddenly in tragic ways, the grief will be different than if someone was at the end of their life, ready to go, and we had time to process that. And for Indigenous people, there is often a lot of loss associated with tragedy. These burial sites at residential schools have been a reminder of that, and so grief for Indigenous people across this nation is palpable right now. But this isn't new. This has been there. The only difference now is that the rest of the nation is seeing it and recognizing it. Grieving ceremonies also affect how we grieve, move through the process. Again, colonization and its effects affect how Indigenous people are able to effectively grieve. For some communities, knowledge of ceremony was disrupted, and therefore they might not have access to means of grieving the loss of their loved ones. Residential schools and missionary movements also shifted how Indigenous people viewed loss. Adapting colonized perspectives into traditional knowledge can explain why there might be some prolongation of grief. These two worldviews are not necessarily congruent in regards to loss, which can make it challenging to move forward. There are several theories of grief, but the most well-known is that of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. In the late 1960s, she noted that most people tend to flow through 5 stages of grief. Someone might cycle through all of them at various times, but because grieving is not a linear process, they might return to a previous stage or move in and out of the stages of grief. The 5 stages are denial. This is considered the initial stage and can help you to survive the loss. There might be shock and disbelief. It allows us to pace our feelings by denying it initially, allowing ourselves to kind of catch up with the idea that we have lost someone. There might be some emotional numbing in this stage. As denial and shock begin to fade, we begin to process our feelings. The next phase is anger. As reality sets in, we might think things like, "Why me? And this is not fair." There might be blaming others, blaming ourselves, blaming the loved one we've lost. Anger can be a helpful and healing part of the process. As anger resolves, we might begin to bargain. During this phase, we sometimes ask ourselves the what ifs. What if I had answered my phone? What if we had gone to the doctor sooner? During this stage, we might find ourselves saying or thinking things like, "If you just bring them back to me, I will never get angry at them again." The depression stage of grief is considered to be a normal response in this context. The sadness, withdrawal, and disconnect are considered a normal part of grief. However, sometimes if we stay too long in this stage, it is no longer considered normal and is something we might need to seek help for. The final stage, according to Kubler-Ross, is acceptance. Reaching this stage does not necessarily mean everything is all better. We might still be sad and struggling. However, during this phase, we come to understand, acknowledge, and accept the loss, which allows us to continue to process the grief. Although they are presented as distinct, separate, and linear, grief is messy. We can move in and out of stages. We can reach acceptance and then fall back into an earlier stage. There is no one way to grieve, and it will be different for everybody. There are different things that might lead us to experience grief. These can include things like the loss of a job, ending of an important relationship, for example, friendship, marriage, siblings, dating relationships, miscarriage, grown children moving away, losing a pet, serious injury or illness of ourselves or a loved one, and of course when someone we love dies. What we might also be grieving, and what might complicate Indigenous grief, is the loss of tradition, a sense of ourselves, connection to spirit and past. This grief can be difficult to resolve in a society that perpetrates ongoing violences that disconnect Indigenous people from tradition, culture, and language. Grief can manifest in many different ways. We might have emotional, mental, physical, or behavioral symptoms of grief. Emotional symptoms might include shock, surprise, and confusion, especially if it's sudden or unexpected. Sadness, a common reaction to loss that might be accompanied by related emotions like loneliness, despair, nostalgia, or anguish. Anger, at creator, ourselves, medical providers, or even the person we lost. Increased irritability. Guilt, often over things left unsaid, unfinished, or not making amends. Finally, there might be fear and anxiety. It's normal to feel anxious, worried, or helpless, and panic attacks might also occur. Mental symptoms include rumination, thinking about mistakes or missteps related to their loss, and wishing we could change something. Worry, about things like what life will be like without the person or thing you've lost, or maybe about the spiritual state of the lost loved one. Intrusive memories, all sorts of people, places, or things can trigger memories of the loss. And fantasizing about what their life would be like if the loss hadn't occurred. Physical symptoms might include tiredness and fatigue, weight gain, weight loss, or changes to appetite, increased physical pain. And lastly, some behavioral symptoms to look out for include difficulty sleeping, either too much or too little, social isolation or withdrawal, avoidance of activities, low motivation, feeling disinterested in activities you would normally enjoy. Grief is different for everyone, and it can be different for each type of loss we experience. This can sometimes make it challenging for us to process our experiences because in comparing ourselves to others and their experiences, we might think we are doing something wrong. Maybe it's lasting too long. Maybe we're not sad enough. The first rule of healthy grief processing is that there is no timeline. We just have to take the time it takes for each one of us personally. Feel the feelings. Allow yourself space to feel whatever it is that comes up for you, sadness, anger, regret. Try not to live too long in negative feelings like guilt, but allow them their space so you can process and move through them. Talk with others when you feel ready and able. Talking things out helps us to get the feelings outside of ourselves so they are not just living in us. It can help the feelings to become lighter, to ease up if we let them out. And if talking feels too uncomfortable, try writing things out. Sometimes writing letters to those we've lost and offering it to a sacred fire can be a great way to release some of what you're feeling. Talk to a therapist. If there are no safe spaces, if your grief seems to be prolonged and unresolving, a therapist can help you work through what you are experiencing. If you cannot find a therapist who is a good match, or if it is your preference, consulting an elder can be helpful. Get physical. Getting up and going for walks, moving your body can help you to de-stress and feel a little better. Spiritual, traditional, and ceremonial activities can help us to learn to transition through loss. These can help us to heal and reconnect. Right now, grief has been a prominent emotion amongst my Indigenous clients and my friends. On a positive note, grief comes from a place of big love. This current grief is a collective feeling of love for our ancestors. And that, although heavy and difficult, is also a beautiful thing. If you are having difficult feelings right now, check in with someone you trust. Attend ceremony if possible, or check in with a therapist who understands your grief experience. Miigwech for watching today. Miigwech for your existence, your resistance, and resilience. Bamapi.